two best friends are gunned down, but footage from the aftermath poses more questions than answers.
It's clear to us that this happened somewhere else.
I want to hit my head against the wall. Now we're back to square one again.
Tonight, two young men are in critical condition after a double shooting.
To solve the case, Lieutenant Joe Kenda reaches out to an old friend for help.
It gets no better than this. You've got a hot tip, and it's an ongoing situation.
As investigators inch closer to the truth, a sinister plot emerges.
He believes it was the same vehicle he saw on television.
Now I think we're going to get somewhere. All choices come with consequences. Some are unintended. And some of those choices put you in harm's way.
It's Saturday night, and Officer Dennis Jewell is patrolling the east side of the city.
That particular day, I did have a civilian ride along with me. That ride-along person happened to be my sister-in-law, Debbie, who wanted to know what my job entailed.
Dispatch to car 44. We have reports of an intoxicated individual requiring medical assistance.
That night we were out driving down the road and he got a call.
Car 44, 10-4.
Drunk person?
Yeah, this could get interesting.
Car 44, be advised, this is now a shooting. They are reporting shots fired.
And while en route, I was notified via dispatch that it looked like this was coming in as a shooting.
Did they just say a shooting?
Yeah, hold on.
This was really, really exciting because I had never been somewhere where someone had gotten shot before.
Listen to me, Debbie. No matter what happens, I need you to stay in the car.
And I just said, I will definitely stay in the car. I do not want to die tonight.
An ambulance has beaten them there. And so they see one victim on the ground being treated, and then they realize that there is another person inside with paramedics attending to him also.
Stay with me. Come on. Hey, buddy, stay with me. Come on.
Man, he looks bad.
Can I get an escort to the hospital?
You got it. Follow me.
Based on what I was seeing, there was a good chance that this individual wasn't going to survive this.
But I was hoping he wasn't going to die. No one deserves that.
Oh, hey, Joe. Will you come in here and fasten me up?
Sure. The kind of occupations that my wife and I had, she's a nurse, I'm a policeman, resulted in little or no social engagements. And at this particular moment, Kathy's pleased at the idea of going out.
You look great.
Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself. We really need to get going. Mike and Sandy are already there.
You know where the keys are?
Yeah, they're over there on the...
And of course, the phone rings. And we are going out, but not together because I'm going to work.
It's Kenda. All right, I'll be right there. Bye. Sorry, Kath, rain check?
Well, you can keep a rain check, but I'm not missing out on my night.
Give Mike and Sandy my best.
I will. And, hey, be careful.
This crime scene is a convenience store parking lot attached to a gas station on Galley Road.
That convenience store was an absolutely notorious area of town. It's such high traffic for problems.
When I arrive at the crime scene, patrol officers are already present.
Evening, Lieutenant.
So what do we got?
2 male victims, multiple gunshot wounds. 24-year-old Lance Strickland and 20-year-old Walter Wright. Strickland was transported to St. Francis and Wright to Memorial Hospital.
It is a common practice in medical transport to not bring multiple trauma patients into a hospital. They generally only have one trauma room and one trauma team available.
Are there any witnesses?
Store clerk, one of the victims was found inside, being held for question.
Okay, the store sounds like a good place to start.
Detective Ritz is inside.
Thanks.
Our purpose at this point is to determine what we can from the physical evidence. In the store, where one of the victims collapsed at the front counter when asking for help from the clerk.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Lieutenant. Appreciate you getting here so quick.
You know whose blood this is?
We do. Lance Strickland. I think he probably went down right here. Probably brings the display down trying to stay upright. But he wasn't shot inside.
There's blood smearing on the floor and blood pooling on the floor. You have blood moving in one direction, which is inside the building. Lance Strickland walked into the store and collapsed. The evidence supports that.
If you follow the blood trail, it actually goes out to the parked car outside.
The guy was probably looking for help when he collapsed.
Yeah, that's right. I've got something else for you, though. Follow me.
Now, the vehicle's the entire crime scene that we have. Initially, what we see is the vehicles pulled into the parking lot, kind of parked haphazardly.
Do you know whose vehicle this is?
Yes, sir. Ran the tags. The car comes back registered with one of your victims, Lance Strickland.
Look at the glass on the seat. There's blood on the steering wheel.
Yeah, there's blood back here, too.
So both victims were shot in the vehicle.
The driver's door window has been shattered by gunfire, thought to be .380 caliber. It's possible from looking at this that the shooter was outside the car and shooting into the car.
Find shell casings?
No, sir, I didn't. The other officers found these 2 wallets on the floorboard.
Oh, yeah?
While there was identification in the wallets, there was no money or any other items. This could have been very simple, a robbery that went wrong, where maybe our victims fought back and got shot, or it could be somebody was actually trying to eliminate these 2 individuals.
From the position of the wallets on the floor and the position of the blood, if Lance is the driver and Walter is the rear seat passenger. So if there's 2 individuals in this car, why is one of them in the back seat? There's probably a 3rd person we are currently missing.
Let's see if the clerk can clear into this up for us.
Where's Martin? He's right over there.
Thanks. George?
Yes.
I'm Lieutenant Kenda, this is Detective Ritz. I know it's been a difficult night for you, so we'll try to make this quick.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I've seen a lot of sketchy stuff, but I ain't never seen anything like that before.
What do you mean?
He reports he was working here alone. He had some inventory issues and he was in the back.
What the hell?
When he came back toward his counter position, he sees a young man staggering in the front door.
We get a lot of drunks and they cause problems outside. So I just went ahead and called 911. Yeah, I'm at the market on Valley. I got a drunk guy staggering. Hold on, he's trying to get in.
Help,
hey, man, you can't be in here. Hold on, he's trying to come into the store right now.
Oh, please.
Hey, you need to leave, man. Hey, man, stop! I think he's been shot. He's bleeding. Are you okay? Hold on. What the hell?
He looks out the front window and he sees a second individual who had collapsed out of the car and was trying to crawl toward the store.
Did you see anybody else? Anybody with a gun or anything like that?
No, it was just his friend laying on the ground. There was so much blood, though.
But you didn't hear any gunshots?
No, I didn't. I had the radio going pretty loud in the back.
He was very open and forthwith with us, so it's like we have no reason to doubt him.
Well, thanks for your help. Do you have any working security cameras in the store?
Actually, yeah. I got one that has a view of the whole area. I could get you a tape if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We are thrilled about surveillance cameras because it might contain suspect information. We don't know. We're very anxious to find out.
So the call came in at 7:15. Let's see what was going on the 15 minutes prior to that.
We're hoping to see the actual shooting. We're hoping to see something that will lead us to the identity of the person who shot these two individuals.
We see a vacant lot in the first few frames of the video. And then we see our victim vehicle come driving in at a high rate of speed, slamming to a stop. We see Lance get out of the driver's side, bleeding profusely.
Looks like we have another crime scene to find.
Looks like.
Viewing that tape establishes that this crime did not occur in this parking lot. It happened somewhere else. I want to hit my head against the wall because what we thought might be really useful turns out to be useless. Now we're back to square one again. We're investigating the double shooting of Lance Strickland and Walter Wright. Both are in critical condition. And we have a surveillance tape we thought might show who's responsible for this crime, but it clearly showed that this did not occur in front of the store. We need to find the original crime scene, which we have not yet discovered.
Let's play the tape one more time.
I'll see if I can slow it down. Might help.
Whenever you watch a surveillance tape, you're going to go back and try to concentrate on little particular parts of it.
Oh, you pause it right there?
Yeah.
So that's our man Lance in the driver's seat getting out.
Yeah. He's definitely got blood on his lower back, too.
And I wonder the store clerk thought he was drunk.
Yep.
The gunshot wound in the lower body is extremely painful, so you would certainly consider someone staggering as a result of the pain.
Can we pause it on the car?
Yeah, let me try another angle first.
While looking at the video, there's nobody in the front passenger seat. That could tell us that somebody else was in the car, possibly a shooter. Could there have been others?
So what do you say we split up?
You want to go to Memorial? I'll go to St. Francis.
Sounds good. I'll be over there afterwards.
All right.
We're hopeful that the victims can answer these questions, but we're also concerned they may not be able to ever answer anything.
Hey, how you doing? I'm looking for a gunshot wound victim came in last night, Lance Strickland.
Yeah, I helped admit him last night. The doctor said he's got pretty extensive internal damages. He's in surgery now.
They said that Lance has a gunshot wound to the lower left back. It penetrated and severed part of his colon and opened his lower intestine.
Did you see anything before he went to surgery?
He was in and out of consciousness. He couldn't even remember where he was.
He's in some level of shock from the injury. So he went from coherent speech to incoherent speech.
Has any family showed up?
No, he wanted us to get a hold of his friend Randy Robbins, but we don't have his information.
All right, we'll check on that, and we'll come check on Lance later.
Okay.
Thanks for your help.
Yeah.
Kenda heads to St. Francis in hopes that Walter Wright is in better shape to talk.
Hey, Brian, any luck?
Well, Walter was in surgery when I got here, but his doctors seem pretty hopeful.
He has two separate gunshot wounds, one in the shoulder and one under the right armpit. Both bullets actually missed any vital organs.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah. The responding officer was waiting to talk to us, but right before you arrived, Walter's girlfriend showed up.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
What'd you have to say?
I haven't talked to her yet. I was waiting on you. She's in the hallway just down here.
All right. Miss Logan?
Officers, please tell me you're here about Walter. The doctors won't let me see him.
I said Walter is in surgery, but one of the treating doctors is pretty optimistic that this kid's going to be fine.
Thank you. That's such good news. I haven't stopped shaking since I heard.
I know it's difficult, but we need your help. What can you tell us about Walter?
Well, he looks out for me. He's a hard worker. He's always picking up extra hours.
And what does he do?
He's a roofer.
She says that Walter works for a local roofing company, and that's where he met Lance Strickland.
And it expanded where they're spending a lot of time after hours together. All she knew is that Lance and Walter had planned to hang out all day.
When I didn't hear from Walter, something terrible had happened. It's just not like him.
Can you think of anyone in their lives that might want to harm them?
No. Absolutely not. Everyone likes them. They're friends with everybody.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time. We'll notify you if we need anything.
Thank you.
What do you think? I think we need to talk to this Walter guy.
While they wait for Walter to get out of surgery, they hope the responding officer, Dennis Jewell, might be able to give them some insight.
Officer Jewell, it's good to see you. Thanks for sticking around.
Oh, glad to help.
So Walter was able to give you a statement?
Yes, sir. I had him talking right up until they took him back for surgery.
And when I initially got into the emergency room, I'm trying to get in to get information from him because I don't know if this is the last thing this guy's ever going to say.
Walter explained that he and Lance had been out driving around that evening, trying to figure out what they were going to do.
And they decided to give a friend of a friend a ride.
He described him as a young black male, short hair, tall, slender build.
He was able to tell me that at some point, the person that was riding with them told him to stop the car. The person that pulled a gun said, "Give me all your money."
Shut up, bitch!
And at that point, started shooting.
And after he shoots them both, he gets out of the car and runs off into the night. So now we have a story.
Did he say anything else?
I know he's in a lot of pain, but it felt to me like he was holding back.
Yeah, his story doesn't gel with the evidence.
The physical evidence says the shots were fired from outside the car, not inside the car. So Walter either is mistaken or he's lying about what happened in this event.
Did you say what happened by chance?
Not entirely, but I might have gotten a partial street name.
While I was obtaining information, he was able to give me a partial street sign spelling of VAB.
VAB. All right, well, thank you.
Yep.
I'm not confident that Walter's memory is either reliable or truthful, but a lead is a lead, so we will take what we can get for the moment. When you consider the facts and the condition of these victims, it's fairly obvious that this crime scene is probably not very far away. If it was, they'd already be dead.
Let me know if there's anything else I can help with.
Great, thank you.
Hey, all right, so the convenience store is right here.
Well, there's no way they could have gotten very far.
No.
We make the assumption upon reviewing a city map that it has to be very close to that convenience store.
Here we go. VAB, Babcock Road.
That's got to be it.
There we go. About 2.5 blocks from the convenience store.
Candace sends a small team of officers to canvass Babcock Road.
From what we know, our suspect apparently had to shoot him here and then leave. We want to know if he left anything behind that might identify him.
We were looking for physical evidence, automotive glass, maybe blood, maybe expended casings from a handgun. More importantly, it can possibly produce a witness to the event.
Anything?
No, nothing yet. The few people we did talk to were too far out of range to have seen anything.
Yeah, no surprises there. Thanks.
There are very few houses on this street, and there's very little possibility for an eyewitness.
Hey, detectives, I think I've got something.
Looks like it came from 380.
Yeah, I got broken glass over here, too.
Yeah, looks like we found our crime scene.
Even though we found where the shooting took place, we're not getting anywhere with crime scene evidence, and we're not getting anywhere with witnesses because we can't produce any. I decided to use a tried and true tactic to gain new information.
I got an idea. 4-1 to dispatch.
Go 4-1.
I need you to patch me through to KKTV. We need to get Ann Irvin to the market on Galley right away.
Tonight, 2 young men are in critical condition after a double shooting, and the police are looking to the public for help.
I mean, it gets no better than this. You've got a hot tip, it's going on right now, and it comes from the best source you can get, which is police. And it's an ongoing situation.
The victims then drove themselves right here to this store looking for help. The police have released photos of the victim's vehicle and are looking for anyone with information relating to the shooting to call CSPD immediately. I'm Ann Irvin, KKTV News. Okay, cut. Great. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Annie.
Good luck.
Appreciate it.
The next day, our little news stunt actually paid off.
It's Kevin.
My name is John Waters.
Yes?
John Waters says that he thinks the police should talk to his nephew because his nephew was with Lance and Walter on the evening of the shooting.
Oh, really?
I think he's involved in this.
All right, thanks for calling. We'll be there shortly.
Does his nephew carry a gun, or is he yet someone else we don't know about? We investigated the double shooting of Lance Strickland, 24 years of age, and Walter Wright, 20 years of age. The local news does a story on the shooting, and we get one informant that calls in that says he knows both of these victims.
Mr. Waters? Come on in.
We go see Mr. John Waters, the person who called in, and it turns out that he is a very pleasant man, middle-aged guy.
We really appreciate the call.
Well, I was just watching the news. And when I saw Lance's car with that busted window, it got me kind of spooked.
Is Lance a friend of yours?
Yeah, he and Walter are my roofing buddies. We work together downtown. They were just here the other day.
Mr. Waters reports that Lance and Walter stopped by and had a few beers with him and his nephew, who he identifies as Ken Eatman.
All I know is that Lance, Walter, and Ken left together and rode off somewhere.
We suspected that there was a third person in the car. Mr. Waters says there absolutely was, and he was Ken Eatman.
So we're kind of wondering, is Ken our suspect? Is he our shooter?
Do you know where we can find Ken?
Yeah, he's back there in his room. I told him I was calling you guys. Hey, Ken, get out here for a minute.
Perfect. Go wake up your nephew and tell him you want to talk to him.
Are Lance and Walt okay?
Ken, why don't you have a seat?
Ken looks like he's sweating bullets. He has the look of someone who's got something to hide, and we like that.
Would you excuse us for a moment?
Oh, of course.
Thank you. We need you to tell us everything that happened yesterday.
Okay, yesterday. It's not really too much to tell. We were out back and we had a couple beers.
Anybody want another round?
I'll take one.
Gotcha.
Hey, Ken. You think you could help us score some weed?
Some weed? Yeah, I should be able to help you out. How much?
I don't know, man. Just enough to get us all getting high.
All right, I got you.
Ken then says he agreed to help them out.
I had them drop me off at the Senator Mall just to make a phone call to one of my friends.
He would then make a deal, and then the guys would come back and get him. They would go over to some other location where they would complete the deal and be done.
Problem is, I couldn't get a hold of my dealer. So I'm sitting there waiting for them to pick me back up, and they never showed.
So where'd you go after that?
I waited till about 7. After that, I just said forget it, and I just walked home. Now that's a long walk. I was pissed at them until I found out what happened.
Ken is lying through his teeth, which is normal. He's trying to distance himself from the event by saying he never made anything happen. Well, let's leave him be for a minute, and let's go see what else we can learn from someone else.
Sounds like a little if you ask me.
Just makes you wonder who else they ran into that night.
Exactly.
What if Walter and Lance find some 18-year-old kid somewhere along the way who tells them he can provide them with drugs, and he directs them to this out-of-the-way place where he robs and shoots both of them? Well, that could work.
We really don't know a whole lot about our victims, whether they have these contacts. So we've got to find somebody who knows something about the victims that can tell us something.
We know at least one individual associated with Lance by the name of Randy Robbins. We determine where he lives and try to make contact. He's not home, but his wife Laura agrees to talk to us.
Rand and I were planning on heading to the hospital for a visit after he finishes his shift.
Well, that's why we're here. You see, Lance listed Randy as his emergency contact. Any idea why he might do that?
Oh yeah, we all go way back.
Her husband met Lance in California, and they were good enough friends that he asked if he could come stay with them. He's been living with them for several months. He'd been very well behaved. He found a job. He was a good employee, and she liked him.
Listen, Laura, I hate to ask you this, but do you know if Lance was involved in any sort of drugs?
Lance? No. Lance doesn't mess with drugs. But his friend Walter is a different story.
And what do you mean?
Laura Robbins says that she doesn't particularly like Walter and thinks that he may dabble in drugs, and she didn't like it. And she didn't like it when Lance brought him around where they live.
Have you ever seen him using?
No, but he knows how I feel about that stuff. I just have a suspicion.
Well, that's interesting. So we have one novice in Lance and maybe one that isn't in Walter. What we don't yet know with any certainty, what happened on Babcock and who's responsible for it.
And go back and talk to more of the neighbors?
I'm not sure. At this rate, we'll be at it forever.
Detectives, sorry to interrupt. We got a guy who just walked in, says he might have seen your suspects right before the shooting.
Did you say suspects? Have you seen more than one?
Yes, sir.
So we have two shooters. We have a guy that says he knows. Now I think we're going to get somewhere. We're investigating the attempted murder of Lance and Walter, and we now have a witness come forward who says he has seen the two suspects involved in this case.
Robert, I hear you may have some information for us.
I sure do. Nothing gets past me. You see, I lived here a long time, and I absolutely have no tolerance for this criminality.
So what's this?
It's my neighborhood watch notes. I'm the president.
And he further says he's so concerned about the activities of some of the people who live in this neighborhood that he has formed an unofficial neighborhood watch group.
Nosy neighbors are a mixed blessing. They can be a pain in the neck because they're nosy, but they can be really helpful to investigators because of that.
Tell you what, why don't you start by taking us through your notes from the other night?
Of course. It was 7 p.m. on the nose. See, I have it written down right here, so I know. Right? And I heard someone outside my driveway.
So he took a flashlight out to check and make sure his truck was okay.
And when he went to look outside, he observed a black male going over towards a vehicle that was parked across the street, and that this black male got in the vehicle.
I seen the same car on the news story, you know, the one about the shooting later on that night.
Which would be the car driven by the victim, Lance.
Now, I'm sitting outside of my driveway. All of a sudden, I saw something that really just didn't sit right for me.
Can I see your notes on that?
Oh, of course. Look right down there on that line right there.
He sees the vehicle start to leave, and then he sees something that bothers him. He sees another vehicle come out of the side road and start to follow the first vehicle. It was kind of an older aged Cadillac, and saw the driver as being a very stocky black male with a baseball cap.
The stocky black male with a baseball hat is a new player. Hadn't heard anything about him.
Both cars drove away at 7:05. And the news said the call came around 7:15. Now, come on.
Wow, you really were paying attention.
The president.
It's a common procedure when you do a drug rip. You got one guy with your victims, and the Cadillac is his getaway car. He is part of this crime. So what Robert says makes perfect sense to me. So he put out that information, an all points bulletin, and now it's time to talk to those victims and get to the bottom of this.
Remarkably, both Lance Strickland and Walter Wright are expected to make full recoveries.
Hey, Walter. Glad to see you're doing well.
Hey, how's Lance doing? Is he gonna be okay?
Yeah, he's gonna make it.
Man, that's great.
It's an unusual thing to have good news to tell somebody, and Walter seemed very relieved by that.
Walter explains that he and Lance go to John's place because Lance really looks up to John as a mentor.
When we got there, his nephew Ken was there, and I'd only met him a handful of times, but I knew he liked to party.
And it gives Walter an idea. He and Lance like to occasionally smoke marijuana. They asked Ken if he had a hookup, and Ken agreed to help him.
According to Walter, They drove over to Sunny Circle, but Ken insisted he go in to see his dealer alone.
He was so adamant about us not knowing where his friend lived, so we just kind of sat there.
20 minutes turned into 30 minutes. 30 minutes turned into 40 minutes, and Ken didn't come back.
What's taking him so long?
Maybe we should get going.
No, let's give him a few more minutes.
It takes less than 5 minutes when it comes to arranging the purchase of drugs. For this to be this extended period of time, something's very wrong.
I don't know, man. I don't have a good feeling about this.
Hey, look, here he is now.
What's up?
Hey, we've been sitting here for 45 minutes.
Man, it ain't been no 45 minutes. My man is on his way. Give him 1 second.
There he is.
Here you go, right here.
What's up, bro?
Moments later, a young male jumps in the right front passenger seat of Lance's car and introduces himself as Rock.
Can you tell us what this Rock guy looks like?
He's a tall, skinny black kid with short hair. He's all business, very serious.
So it seems that Mr. Rock is our Mr. X.
Rock explains he needs them to drive to another location so they can get the stuff.
Is that car following us?
Oh, no, you good, man. Don't worry about it.
No, I'm serious. Look, it's been behind us for the last few miles.
Rock directed them for just a few minutes, and then Lance notices that he thinks there's a car following them.
Hey, man, quit bugging. I said it's cool. Relax.
Yo, make that left. Walter says they turned on the Babcock, a very dark, vacant kind of area, and he's getting really nervous. And he asks, "Where are you taking us?"
At that point, things just became a blur to him.
Rock guy, he took out a gun. I handed him my wallet, and then everything went white. Next thing I knew is I woke up here.
Do you have any memory of where Ken went after the gun went off?
He set us up to get jacked.
Walter says that he assumes that Ken probably left with Rock at the time this happened. Well, that's entirely possible, and probably likely given the circumstances.
You did good, Walter. We're gonna let you rest.
Hey, if you see Lance, tell him I say hey.
Will do.
We now know that Ken is at this crime scene and is a participant in this robbery. We're going to use that to put pressure on Ken so he gives us Rock. So we go back to John Waters' house looking for Ken.
Police, open up!
Oh, hey.
Hands up, now.
Hey, I was just calling you guys. I can't live with this no more. I can't. I'll talk.
Well, Ken, we were just about to call you because you're not going to live with us anymore either. You're going to live in the penitentiary where you belong. We've been investigating the attempted murder of Walter Wright and Lance Strickland. We have been spinning our wheels trying to unwind this web of lies about what happened.
I'll talk.
We placed Ken Eatman under arrest, and he says he's willing to give up the rest of this story.
Have a seat. Okay.
You read those rights?
Yes, sir.
I can with these rights in mind. You're going to talk to us?
Yeah, man. I want to talk.
And we want the truth this time. No more lies.
I was telling the truth about the whole going to go get weed thing, though. That's all we was doing.
Ken couldn't find anybody that had any stock in supply, but finally somebody suggested that he call this kid known on the street as Rock.
Yeah, look, I got 2 dudes here trying to get some weed. Can you help me out?
Yeah. How much money do they have?
At least about 100. And they just got paid. In cash.
Maybe we can take it from them then.
Okay. I didn't think that he was serious, though. You gotta understand.
We believe that Lance, Walter, and Ken all drove over to Sunny Circle.
Ken got out of the car and made contact with Rock at his house.
All right, man, so how you want to do this?
My homie Bolo got this car we can use.
Yeah, call him right quick. Make sure we good.
Rock called one of his friends who goes by the street name of Bolo, a muscular guy with an old beat-up Cadillac, and asked him to come help commit a robbery.
It just took Bolo forever to get there.
Once Bolo arrived, Rock and Ken kind of set their plan in motion.
All right, I'll follow you too. Once you get the money, we'll bounce in my car.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Whoa, whoa. What are you doing? You about to use that?
Nah, man. This is for show. Come on. Come on, man. Why you looking like that? Come on. Let's do it.
At first, the plan seemed to be working, but all of a sudden, Lance became concerned.
Is that car following us?
Oh, no, you good, man. Don't worry about it.
No, I'm serious. Look, it's been behind us for the last few miles.
Hey, man, quit bugging. I said it's cool. Relax.
And Rock then made the decision that it's now or never.
Hey, yo, make that left. Ken, I don't know about this. Yo, Ken, shut your boy up, man. Shut him up. Look, I know that guy. Pull over there. Do you want the weed or not, man?
Rock opened the passenger door as if he was going to get out and go speak to his friend, but then pulled a gun and leaned back inside the car.
Give me all your money, bitch. Give me your money.
Okay, just take it easy, please.
Give me your money. You want to die? Don't shoot. Hurry up.
Walter and Lance both pulled out their wallets and pleaded with him to just take the money and run.
Just give him the money. Just take it.
Please don't shoot.
Shut up, boy.
All right, you got the money, right?
What you wanted now?
Shut up, bitch.
Instead of running, Rock decided to start shooting. The first two bullets hit Walter, one in the shoulder and one under his right armpit.
Get off me, man.
Lance tried to get out of the car, and as he tried to exit the car, was shot in the lower left back. Ken and Rock got into Bolo's car, and all three took off.
Yeah, you want to play with me? Go, man, go.
As Lance gets back in the car and closes the door, Rock took two more shots, shattering the driver's door glass window and lodging in the passenger door and in the seat. He's obviously a horrible shot, and ultimately that saved Walter and Lance's lives. Then Lance drove he and his friend to the nearby convenience store to get help before he passed out from the blood loss.
Where'd you guys go?
We went down to Pueblo, and then he just vanished out of nowhere. Me and Rock went back to the Springs in the morning.
All right, Ken. So where's the gun?
I don't know exactly where he tossed it, but I can help you find Rock.
We get an arrest warrant listing the suspect as also known as Rock, as his true name isn't known.
Police, open up!
Yes? Is everything all right?
Man, we're looking for someone by the name of Rock. We have a search warrant.
Well, that's my grandson. He's in his room.
Please step aside.
She says his birth name is Humphrey Williams, and he's asleep in his room.
On your feet now!
What?
Now!
Put your hands up. Walk toward me. You're under arrest for the attempted murders of Lance Strickland and Walter Wright.
Yo, I want a lawyer.
Cuff him.
I want a lawyer now.
Change money back. When we're looking with an AKA warrant, we want to make sure we're talking about the same person. So we bring Ken to the scene.
Here they come.
Yeah. Yeah, that's him. You positive?
As we bring Humphrey Williams out of that house in handcuffs.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All right, good deal.
Ken positively identifies the individual we have in hand as Rock, as the person who shot both the victims in this case. With Humphrey Williams now in custody, the search is out for Polo.
Man, I ain't got nothing on me.
Police eventually spot him in his Cadillac and pull him over, and he is arrested. We learn his real name is Ronald Williams. So we wanted to speak to Lance to get a statement from him. We have one from Walter. We have one from Ken.
So how you feeling?
I'm getting through it. You know, I'm looking forward to walking again and getting out of here.
Yeah, I bet.
Can you give us your version of what happened that night?
Sure.
Lance confirmed what Walter said about the shooting, without a doubt. We have the people responsible under arrest.
Well, we're just glad you made it out alive.
It's a pleasant experience to have a case where people survive. I wasn't accustomed to that.
On the night of October 12th, 1987, somewhere inside a Vancouver hotel, a 27-year-old woman lay dead. Her name was Vanessa Lee Buckner. She was not found in a dark alley. There was no broken window, no blood-covered weapon, no obvious sign of a violent struggle. There was no gunshot that could point investigators toward a killer, no knife left behind, no stranger seen running down a hallway. Instead, there was alcohol, an enormous amount of it. By the time Vanessa's body was discovered at the Niagara Hotel, the alcohol in her blood had reached a level that would have been almost impossible to survive. The number recorded in the case was approximately 0.91. It was not simply a matter of a woman who had been drinking too much. Something had happened to her, and the man who had been drinking with her the night before was still alive. His name was Gilbert Paul Jordan. To some people in Vancouver, he was a barber. To others, he was a drunk. To police, he would eventually become something much more disturbing. But in the beginning, before the surveillance cameras, before the hidden police officers, before the courtroom and the prison sentence, Gilbert Paul Jordan was simply a man who knew how to find people who were vulnerable. And he knew how to use alcohol. That was what made his story so difficult to understand. Because alcohol was everywhere. It was legal. It was ordinary. People bought it in stores. They drank it in bars. They carried bottles into hotel rooms. They poured it into glasses and passed those glasses from one hand to another. And Jordan appeared to understand something terrifying about it. A person could be killed by something they had willingly picked up and swallowed. A person could become helpless without a single blow being struck. A person could lose consciousness so gradually that, to an outsider, it might look like nothing more than drunkenness. And once someone was unconscious, the difference between a dangerous amount of alcohol and a fatal amount could become almost impossible to see until it was too late. For years, women had died under circumstances that carried echoes of one another. Again and again, Jordan's name appeared around the edges of those deaths. But appearing near a death was not the same thing as being legally responsible for it. That distinction would become one of the most important facts in the entire story. Because Gilbert Paul Jordan was eventually linked by investigators to a number of women's deaths, with estimates in the case material placing the figure somewhere around 8 to 10 between 1965 and the late 1980s. Yet legally, only one of those deaths resulted in a criminal conviction against him. Vanessa Lee Buckner. And that is where the story truly begins. Not with the courtroom. Not with the sentence. Not even with the arrest. It begins with a question. How many times can the same pattern appear before someone realizes that it is a pattern? In 1965, a woman named Ivy Rose was reportedly with Jordan during a drinking session. Later, her naked body was found in a Vancouver hotel. The recorded blood alcohol level was approximately 0.51. There was no criminal charge against Jordan for her death. At the time, the death could be understood through the simplest explanation available. Alcohol had killed her. A woman had been drinking. A woman had consumed a lethal amount of alcohol. A woman had died. The bottle could explain everything. And perhaps that was precisely what made the next years so dangerous. Because when a person dies from something that looks ordinary, people can become accustomed to the explanation. Alcohol. Overdose. Accident. Bad choices. Another tragedy in a city where many people were already struggling. But the women who would later become associated with Jordan's story were not simply names on police reports. They were people who had lives before the hotel rooms. They had voices. They had histories. They had people who knew them. And many of them lived within circumstances that made them particularly vulnerable. The women connected to Jordan were often indigenous women living in poverty, dealing with alcoholism, or surviving through prostitution. Their circumstances mattered, because vulnerability changes the way a person moves through the world. It changes who notices when they disappear. It changes who believes them. And sometimes, most tragically of all, it changes how quickly someone recognizes that a death may not have been an accident. Years passed. Then another woman died. Then another. Mary Johnson in 1980. Barbara Paul in 1981. Mary Johns in 1982. Patricia Thomas in 1984. Patricia Andrew in 1985. Vera Eri in 1986. Different years. Different locations. Different women. But alcohol kept appearing. And so did Jordan. The recorded blood alcohol levels in these cases were extraordinarily high in several instances. Mary Johnson's was listed at approximately 0.34. Barbara Paul's was approximately 0.41. Mary Johns reached approximately 0.76. Patricia Thomas, approximately 0.51. Patricia Andrew, approximately 0.79. The numbers were shocking. But numbers alone do not tell a story. A number cannot tell you what a woman looked like before she entered a hotel room. It cannot tell you what she was thinking. It cannot tell you whether she trusted the man sitting across from her. It cannot tell you whether she realized she was becoming dangerously intoxicated. And it certainly cannot tell you what happened during the final minutes before she lost consciousness. That is the darkness surrounding Gilbert Paul Jordan. The unanswered space between one drink and the next. Between consent and coercion. Between drunkenness and unconsciousness. Between a person choosing to drink and a person being deliberately encouraged to drink beyond the point where they could protect themselves. By October 1987, that darkness had a name. Vanessa Lee Buckner. She was 27 years old. On October 12th, police found her body inside the Niagara Hotel in Vancouver. The night before, she had been drinking with Gilbert Paul Jordan. When investigators examined the circumstances surrounding her death, the alcohol level stood out immediately. Approximately 0.91. A number so extreme that it demanded attention. Jordan denied direct responsibility. But investigators were no longer looking at an isolated death. They had begun to look backward. And when detectives look backward, they sometimes discover that what appeared to be a series of unrelated tragedies may have been something else entirely. A pattern. Jordan's name had surfaced before. There were other women. Other hotel rooms. Other deaths. Other moments when alcohol had been present in quantities that could overwhelm the human body. And now there was Vanessa. The police began paying closer attention. Then another woman, Edna Shade, was found dead. And the focus on Jordan intensified. This time, investigators did something different. They watched him. They followed him. They observed where he went and whom he approached. They watched the places where he searched for women. And what they saw began to change the meaning of everything that had come before. Jordan was not merely disappearing into bars and returning alone. He was looking for vulnerable women in Vancouver's downtown east side. Women who could be persuaded. Women who could be offered money. Women who could be given alcohol. Women who could be encouraged to drink. And the police began to understand that the most important evidence might not be another dead body. It might be a living witness. Between the middle of October and the end of November 1987, officers intervened in 4 cases involving women who were with Jordan. Their names were Rosemary Wilson, Verna Chartrand, Sheila Joe, and Mabel Olson. These women were not bodies discovered after the fact. They were people police could observe while Jordan was still alive, while the events were still unfolding. In 2 of those cases, the recorded blood alcohol levels were approximately 0.52 and 0.43. And then there were the words. Jordan offered women money to drink. $20. $50. $75. The amounts themselves were not the most important part. It was the behavior behind them. He was not simply drinking beside them. He was encouraging them to drink more. To drink faster. To finish what was in front of them. To continue even after the alcohol had already begun to overwhelm them. And according to the case material, investigators heard him urging women to drink and offering payment as an incentive. For detectives, this was different from a dead body in a hotel room. This was behavior they could see, a method they could observe, a pattern they could document. The question was no longer simply, did Gilbert Paul Jordan know these women? The question was becoming much darker. What did he want from them? And what happened when they could no longer say no? By late November, the police were watching him again. One surveillance operation brought them closer than ever before. Jordan was with a woman who had become incapable of resisting. She was no longer simply drunk. She was unconscious. And according to descriptions of the incident contained in the case material, investigators witnessed Jordan forcing alcohol into her mouth while she was incapacitated. That moment changed everything. For years, the police had been left with dead women and questions. Now they were watching the behavior happen in front of them. There was no need to reconstruct an entire night from a corpse. No need to wonder whether a woman had simply drunk too much on her own. No need to imagine what might have happened behind a closed hotel door. The investigators were there. They could see. They could act. And they did. Gilbert Paul Jordan was arrested. But an arrest is not the same thing as an answer. Because the moment the police took Jordan into custody, another problem emerged. How do you prove a pattern in court? How do you take years of suspicion, a collection of deaths, frightened survivors, hotel rooms, blood alcohol levels, surveillance observations, and one man's disturbing behavior, and turn all of that into evidence beyond a reasonable doubt? The women who had already died could not testify. The women who had survived could describe what happened to them. But every death had its own circumstances. And Jordan could not simply be convicted for every tragedy that investigators associated with his name. The law demanded something more precise. Something narrower. Something that could be proven. Ultimately, the case centered on Vanessa Lee Buckner. In 1988, Gilbert Paul Jordan stood trial before a judge rather than a jury. The courtroom would hear about Vanessa. It would hear about alcohol. It would hear about Jordan's behavior. And evidence concerning other women would become important because of the similarities between their cases. But the question before the court was not whether Jordan was a disturbing man. It was not whether his name had appeared around other deaths. It was not whether investigators believed there was a larger pattern. The question was whether the evidence established his criminal responsibility for Vanessa Lee Buckner's death. Justice Bauch found him guilty of manslaughter. One woman. One conviction. One legal answer. But outside the courtroom, another question remained alive. What about the others? What about Ivy Rose? What about Mary Johnson? Barbara Paul? Mary Johns? Patricia Thomas? Patricia Andrew? Vida Eri. What about the women who survived encounters with Jordan? What about the women whose stories never became convictions? What about the possibility that the deaths investigators had connected to him were not isolated tragedies at all? These questions would never disappear completely. Jordan was initially sentenced to 15 years in prison. The sentence was later reduced to 9 years on appeal. He ultimately served approximately 6 years before being released. 6 years. For a case surrounded by so many questions. For a man associated with a pattern that investigators had spent years trying to understand. For one conviction. And then years later, the story would continue. Because prison did not erase Gilbert Paul Jordan. Release did not erase his history. The conditions placed upon him restricted his access to alcohol and his contact with women in situations involving drinking. But those restrictions would prove difficult for him to follow. In 2000, Jordan faced further allegations involving sexual assault, negligent causing of bodily harm, and providing a noxious substance, in this case alcohol. Those allegations did not result in a corresponding conviction. In 2002, he was arrested again for violating his probation conditions after being found drinking and in the company of a woman under circumstances that were prohibited. He received another prison sentence. And in 2004, when he was 72 years old, the old pattern of trouble with alcohol and probation returned again. He was connected to a drinking incident in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and later disappeared from the area where he was required to remain. Police issued a Canada-wide warrant. Jordan was eventually arrested at a hotel in Winnipeg in August 2004. Some of the allegations connected to that incident did not result in convictions. 2 years later, on July 7, 2006, Gilbert Paul Jordan died in Victoria, British Columbia. He was 74 years old. And with his death came an ending that was also, in many ways, unfinished. Because Jordan took something with him that no court had ever fully answered. How many women had died because of him? How many deaths had only been suspected? How many women had survived long enough to tell their stories? And how many women had disappeared into the statistics of poverty, addiction, prostitution, and alcohol without anyone stopping to ask whether someone else had helped them toward the edge? Gilbert Paul Jordan became known as the Boozing Barber. The nickname sounds almost casual, almost absurd. But behind it are hotel rooms. There are women whose lives ended. There are families who lost daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends. There are investigators who spent years trying to separate coincidence from intent. There are survivors who encountered a man offering money in exchange for another drink. And there is one haunting fact that sits at the center of everything. Jordan did not need a conventional weapon. He did not need a gun. He did not need a knife. He could use something ordinary, something legal. Something that could be poured into a glass and handed to another person without immediately looking like a threat. Alcohol. The same substance that could make a person laugh could also make them stumble. The same substance that could make someone careless could make them helpless. And once a person was unconscious, the line between drinking and being forced to drink could become terrifyingly thin. That is why the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan cannot begin with the question, was he a serial killer? That question is too simple. It asks for a label before it asks for the evidence. The better question is more disturbing. What happens when a man's behavior repeatedly appears beside the deaths of vulnerable women? But the evidence is never strong enough to turn every suspicion into a conviction. And what happens to the people who are left behind when the law can answer only one death at a time? In the case of Vanessa Lee Buckner, the court gave one answer: manslaughter. But Vanessa was not a statistic. She was 27 years old. She had a life before the Niagara Hotel. And somewhere between the first drink and the last, that life ended. The courtroom could determine responsibility. It could impose a sentence. It could close a case file. But it could not bring Vanessa back. And it could not answer for every woman whose name had appeared before hers. That is where the story begins. Not with a monster appearing from the darkness, but with something much more unsettling. A man sitting beside a woman. A bottle between them. A drink being poured. Another drink being offered. And another. Until the woman who had been capable of choosing was no longer capable of protecting herself. And somewhere outside that room, a city continued moving. People walked through Vancouver's streets. Hotel doors opened and closed. Bartenders served drinks. Cars passed under the night sky. And behind one of those doors, a woman was slipping beyond the point of return. Her name was Vanessa Lee Buckner. And the man beside her was Gilbert Paul Jordan. There are murders that announce themselves. A gunshot in the middle of the night. A scream behind a locked door. A body found in a place where no one was supposed to be. Those deaths leave behind a language that investigators understand almost instinctively. A weapon. A wound. Blood. Fingerprints. A struggle. Something physical that says, without ambiguity, that another human being was involved. But some deaths are quieter. They can look like accidents. They can look like addiction. They can look like a person simply going too far, one drink beyond what the body could withstand. And sometimes that appearance is exactly what makes them so difficult to investigate. For Gilbert Paul Jordan, alcohol was not simply something he consumed. According to the case material, it became the center of a disturbing pattern. Women were found dead after drinking. Some had been drinking with Jordan. Some had been seen with him shortly before their deaths. And in several cases, the amount of alcohol inside their bodies was so extreme that the numbers themselves became part of the story. But numbers do not scream. Numbers do not tell investigators what happened during the last hour of a person's life. A blood alcohol reading can tell you how much alcohol was present in the body. It cannot tell you who poured the drink. It cannot tell you who encouraged another drink. It cannot tell you whether the person holding the glass understood what was happening to them. And it cannot tell you what happened after consciousness began to disappear. That uncertainty surrounded Jordan for years. The first known death connected to him in the case material reaches back to 1965. A woman named Ivy Rose had reportedly been drinking with Jordan. Later, Her naked body was discovered in a Vancouver hotel. The blood alcohol level recorded in connection with her death was approximately 0.51. There was no criminal charge against Jordan for her death. And that detail matters, because this story is not a simple chain of proven murders. It is a story built from different levels of certainty. There were deaths investigators associated with Jordan. There were women who survived encounters with him. There were observations made by police. There was evidence that eventually became important in court. And there was only one death for which Jordan was ultimately convicted. Vanessa Lee Buckner. That distinction must remain at the center of the story. Because the easiest way to tell a crime story is to take every unanswered question and turn it into certainty. But real investigations rarely work that way. The dead cannot explain what happened. The accused can deny responsibility. And investigators have to build a case from what remains. Sometimes what remains is enough. Sometimes it is not. For years, the evidence surrounding Jordan remained fragmented. A woman here. A hotel there. A bottle. A blood alcohol reading. A name remembered by someone. A man seen leaving. Another woman dead. Then another. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, those fragments began to resemble something. A pattern. By the 1980s, several deaths were associated with circumstances involving Jordan. Mary Johnson died in 1980. Her blood alcohol level was recorded at approximately 0.34. Barbara Paul died the following year, with a recorded level of approximately 0.41. Mary Johns died in 1982. Her recorded blood alcohol level was approximately 0.76. Patricia Thomas died in 1984, with a level of approximately 0.51. Patricia Andrew died in 1985. Her recorded level was approximately 0.79. And in 1986, Vera Harry died, with the case material recording a level of approximately 0.04. These were not identical cases. They did not all happen in the same place. They did not all happen in the same year. And not every death could be legally attributed to Jordan. But these cases later became important as similar fact evidence in the proceedings surrounding Vanessa Lee Buckner. That meant something significant had changed. The earlier deaths were no longer simply isolated names in old files. Their similarities could now be examined alongside the case that had finally brought Jordan before a court. The past was being pulled into the present. And when investigators began looking backward, the question became increasingly difficult to ignore. What if these were not unrelated tragedies? What if there was a human connection between them? What if that connection was Gilbert Paul Jordan? The answer could not simply be assumed. It had to be proven. And that is where Vanessa entered the story. She was 27 years old. On October 12, 1987, police found her body at the Niagara Hotel in Vancouver. The night before, she had been drinking with Jordan. That single fact suddenly carried enormous weight, because now the investigators had another dead woman, another hotel, another night involving alcohol, another connection to Jordan. And this time, the blood alcohol level was approximately 0.91. The number was staggering. But even then, a number alone did not tell the entire story. The investigators needed to understand what had happened before Vanessa died. Who had been with her? What had she consumed? How had she become so intoxicated? And what had Jordan done during those final hours? Jordan denied direct responsibility. But investigators had another reason to pay attention to him. His fingerprints were found at the scene associated with Buckner. Then another woman, Edna Shade, was found dead. And suddenly, the name Gilbert Paul Jordan was no longer sitting quietly in the background. It was moving toward the center. The police began surveillance. This was the moment when the investigation changed character. Until then, detectives had largely been trying to reconstruct the past. Now they could watch the present. They could follow Jordan. They could observe where he went. They could see whom he approached. They could watch what happened when alcohol entered the room. And what they saw was deeply disturbing. Jordan was searching for women in Vancouver's downtown east side. Many of the women connected to his story were Indigenous women living under circumstances of severe vulnerability. Poverty, addiction, prostitution, social isolation. These conditions did not make them less valuable, but they could make them easier for someone else to exploit. A woman struggling with addiction may already be accustomed to people treating her drinking as unremarkable. A woman surviving through prostitution may already be accustomed to strangers offering money. A woman living on the margins may disappear without the world immediately demanding answers. And that is what makes the case so uncomfortable. Jordan did not appear to need to force his way into someone's life. He could offer something. A drink. Money. Company. Then another drink. And another. The police began seeing the same basic behavior repeatedly. Between the middle of October and the end of November 1987, officers intervened in 4 cases involving women Jordan was with: Rosemary Wilson, Verna Chartrand, Sheila Joe, Mabel Olson. These names are important because they represent something that the earlier deaths could not provide. They were living witnesses. People police could encounter before the story ended in a morgue. In 2 of those cases, the women's blood alcohol levels were recorded at approximately 0.52 and 0.43. And investigators heard Jordan encouraging women to drink. He offered money as an incentive: $20, $50, $75. The amounts might sound small today, but the meaning was not in the amount. The meaning was in the exchange. Drink more. Keep drinking. Finish it. And I will pay you. To investigators, that behavior offered a possible explanation for something that had been difficult to understand in the earlier deaths. Perhaps Jordan was not simply present when women drank themselves into unconsciousness. Perhaps he was actively encouraging the process. That distinction was crucial. There is a world of difference between 2 people sitting together with drinks and one person deliberately pushing another to continue drinking after that person's ability to make decisions has deteriorated. And according to the evidence described in the case material, Jordan repeatedly crossed that line. The police were watching. They were listening. They were documenting. And every new observation gave greater meaning to the deaths that had come before. Still, there was a problem. The law does not convict someone because a pattern feels disturbing. It does not convict someone because investigators believe 2 cases look similar. It does not convict someone because a man has behaved badly around vulnerable people. It requires evidence. And evidence is often strongest when it captures a person doing something rather than merely being present after something has happened. That opportunity came near the end of November. The police were watching Jordan again. He was with a woman who had become incapable of resisting. She was unconscious. The scene had crossed a threshold. She could no longer protect herself. She could no longer meaningfully participate in what was happening. And according to the case material, investigators saw Jordan forcing alcohol into her mouth. Think about the difference. A dead body can tell investigators that something went terribly wrong. A blood test can tell them that an enormous amount of alcohol entered the body. A hotel room can establish where the death occurred. But an officer watching an incapacitated woman while another person forces more alcohol into her mouth is something different. That is behavior. That is an action. That is a moment. And for the investigators watching, it was a moment that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Jordan was arrested. But the arrest was not the end of the mystery. It was the beginning of another one. Because now the police had to prove what they believed they had discovered. Was Vanessa Lee Buckner another tragic victim of alcohol? Or had Gilbert Paul Jordan played a criminal role in her death? And if he had, what about the other women? Could their deaths be connected to the same behavior? Could a court look at years of deaths and see what investigators believed they had seen? Or would each death remain trapped inside its own uncertainty? These questions would follow Jordan into the courtroom. But before that happened, there was something else that needed to be understood. The women. The people behind the statistics. The names that risked disappearing beneath words like alcohol-related death. Because there is a danger in telling this story only through the eyes of Gilbert Paul Jordan. His name is famous. His nickname survived. His conviction became part of Canadian criminal history. But the women did not become famous. Their lives were not turned into legends. Their faces did not become symbols in the same way. And that imbalance is important. The central figure in a true crime story is often the offender because the offender creates the mystery. But the mystery should never erase the victim. Vanessa Lee Buckner was 27. Before the Niagara Hotel, she was a person with a life that existed beyond the case file. And whatever happened during her final night, that life ended there. Her death became the case that finally brought Jordan to trial. But she was not the first woman whose death had been associated with him. And she would not be the last name to raise questions about his behavior. By the time investigators were watching Jordan in 1987, more than 2 decades had passed since Ivy Rose's death. 22 years. More than 2 decades in which the world had changed around him. Yet the central element remained. Alcohol. Again and again. And that is perhaps the most unsettling part of the entire story. There was no secret laboratory. No exotic poison. No elaborate weapon. No complicated mechanism. There was simply a substance that people had been using for centuries. A substance that could be bought openly. A substance that could be carried into a hotel room. A substance that could be handed to a stranger. And in the hands of someone who understood how vulnerable an intoxicated person could become, it could be turned into something far more dangerous. Jordan's alleged method did not begin with violence. It began with persuasion. That is what makes the story so difficult to watch. Because persuasion can look harmless from the outside. A man offers a woman a drink. He offers her money. He encourages her to finish it. He laughs. He waits. Then he offers another. Nothing about the first moment necessarily looks like murder. There is no obvious point where a bystander can say, that is when the crime began. The line moves gradually, drink by drink, minute by minute, until suddenly the woman cannot stand. Then she cannot speak clearly. Then she cannot resist. Then she cannot protect herself. And if no one intervenes, the room can become completely silent. That was the silence investigators were trying to understand. A silence that appeared in hotel rooms. A silence that appeared around women whose lives had already been pushed toward the margins. A silence that could be explained away by alcohol. Until someone finally began asking whether alcohol was really the whole explanation. The investigation into Gilbert Paul Jordan would eventually lead to a conviction. But it would not produce a complete answer to every death connected to his name. That distinction would remain with the case forever. One conviction. Many suspicions. Several surviving women. A collection of deaths. And a man whose behavior, when finally observed directly, gave investigators a glimpse into what might have been happening behind closed doors for years. That is why the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan is not simply about a man who drank with women. It is about the moment when drinking stopped being a social act and became a mechanism of control. It is about what happens when one person remains conscious enough to understand what is happening while another person becomes too intoxicated to understand anything at all. It is about the vulnerability of people whom society often fails to protect. And it is about how easily a death can disappear when everyone is already prepared to believe the simplest explanation. She drank too much. She had a problem. It was an accident. There was nothing anyone could do. For decades, those explanations existed around the edges of Jordan's story. Then Vanessa died. And suddenly, those explanations were no longer enough. Police began watching. They began recording. They began connecting. And eventually, they saw something that could not be explained away so easily. A woman who could no longer resist. A man beside her. Alcohol being forced into her mouth. And officers watching from nearby. That was the moment the past and the present collided. The old deaths. The hotel rooms. The names. The numbers. The suspicions. All of them seemed to point toward the same question. Had Gilbert Paul Jordan discovered a way to make deadly behavior look like ordinary drinking? And if so, how many times had he done it? The answer would never be completely established in court. But the investigation would reveal enough to transform the name Gilbert Paul Jordan into one of the darkest names associated with Vancouver's history of alcohol-related deaths. The Boozing Barber. A nickname that sounds almost harmless until you remember the women behind it. Until you remember Vanessa. Until you remember Ivy Rose. Until you remember the other names. And until you understand that behind every number was a human body, a human life, and a final moment that no one could go back and change. The courtroom would eventually decide what could be proven. History would remember what had been suspected. But the women themselves deserved something different. They deserved to be remembered as people. And that is where the story must go next. Away from the man. Away from the nickname. Away from the headlines. And toward the women who were there before the bottles were opened. before the hotel doors closed, before the police arrived, before their names became part of someone else's story. Because if we want to understand what happened to Vanessa Lee Buckner, we first have to understand the world she was living in. A world where vulnerability could be mistaken for weakness. A world where addiction could make a person's suffering invisible. A world where a woman could disappear into a hotel room, and the first explanation offered might be that she had simply drunk too much. And in that world, Gilbert Paul Jordan knew exactly what he was offering. A drink. A little money. A little company. Then another drink. And another. Until the person sitting across from him was no longer able to walk away. The next part of the story begins there. With the women. With Vancouver. And with the world that allowed these encounters to happen again and again. There are murders that announce themselves. A gunshot in the middle of the night. A scream behind a locked door. A body found in a place where no one was supposed to be. Those deaths leave behind a language that investigators understand almost instinctively. A weapon. A wound. Blood. Fingerprints. A struggle. Something physical that says, without ambiguity, that another human being was involved. But some deaths are quieter. They can look like accidents. They can look like addiction. They can look like a person simply going too far, one drink beyond what the body could withstand. And sometimes that appearance is exactly what makes them so difficult to investigate. For Gilbert Paul Jordan, alcohol was not simply something he consumed. According to the case material, it became the center of a disturbing pattern. Women were found dead after drinking. Some had been drinking with Jordan. Some had been seen with him shortly before their deaths. And in several cases, the amount of alcohol inside their bodies was so extreme that the numbers themselves became part of the story. But numbers do not scream. Numbers do not tell investigators what happened during the last hour of a person's life. A blood alcohol reading can tell you how much alcohol was present in the body. It cannot tell you who poured the drink. It cannot tell you who encouraged another drink. It cannot tell you whether the person holding the glass understood what was happening to them. And it cannot tell you what happened after consciousness began to disappear. That uncertainty surrounded Jordan for years. The first known death connected to him in the case material reaches back to 1965. A woman named Ivy Rose had reportedly been drinking with Jordan. Later, her naked body was discovered in a Vancouver hotel. The blood alcohol level recorded in connection with her death was approximately 0.51. There was no criminal charge against Jordan for her death. And that detail matters, because this story is not a simple chain of proven murders. It is a story built from different levels of certainty. There were deaths investigators associated with Jordan. There were women who survived encounters with him. There were observations made by police. There was evidence that eventually became important in court. And there was only one death for which Jordan was ultimately convicted. Vanessa Lee Buckner. That distinction must remain at the center of the story. Because the easiest way to tell a crime story is to take every unanswered question and turn it into certainty. But real investigations rarely work that way. The dead cannot explain what happened. The accused can deny responsibility. And investigators have to build a case from what remains. Sometimes what remains is enough. Sometimes it is not. For years, the evidence surrounding Jordan remained fragmented. A woman here. A hotel there. A bottle. A blood alcohol reading. A name remembered by someone. A man seen leaving. Another woman dead. Then another. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, those fragments began to resemble something. A pattern. By the 1980s, several deaths were associated with circumstances involving Jordan. Mary Johnson died in 1980. Her blood alcohol level was recorded at approximately 0.34. Barbara Paul died the following year, with a recorded level of approximately 0.41. Mary Johns died in 1982. Her recorded blood alcohol level was approximately 0.76. Patricia Thomas died in 1984, with a level of approximately 0.51. Patricia Andrew died in 1985. Her recorded level was approximately 0.79. And in 1986, Vera Harry died, with the case material recording a level of approximately 0.04. These were not identical cases. They did not all happen in the same place. They did not all happen in the same year. And not every death could be legally attributed to Jordan. But these cases later became important as similar fact evidence in the proceedings surrounding Vanessa Lee Buckner. That meant something significant had changed. The earlier deaths were no longer simply isolated names in old files. Their similarities could now be examined alongside the case that had finally brought Jordan before a court. The past was being pulled into the present, and when investigators began looking backward, the question became increasingly difficult to ignore. What if these were not unrelated tragedies? What if there was a human connection between them? What if that connection was Gilbert Paul Jordan? The answer could not simply be assumed. It had to be proven. And that is where Vanessa entered the story. She was 27 years old. On October 12, 1987, police found her body at the Niagara Hotel in Vancouver. The night before, she had been drinking with Jordan. That single fact suddenly carried enormous weight, because now the investigators had another dead woman, another hotel, another night involving alcohol, another connection to Jordan. And this time, the blood alcohol level was approximately 0.91. The number was staggering. But even then, a number alone did not tell the entire story. The investigators needed to understand what had happened before Vanessa died. Who had been with her? What had she consumed? How had she become so intoxicated? And what had Jordan done during those final hours? Jordan denied direct responsibility. But investigators had another reason to pay attention to him. His fingerprints were found at the scene associated with Buckner. Then another woman, Edna Shade, was found dead. And suddenly, the name Gilbert Paul Jordan was no longer sitting quietly in the background. It was moving toward the center. The police began surveillance. This was the moment when the investigation changed character. Until then, detectives had largely been trying to reconstruct the past. Now they could watch the present. They could follow Jordan. They could observe where he went. They could see whom he approached. They could watch what happened when alcohol entered the room. And what they saw was deeply disturbing. Jordan was searching for women in Vancouver's downtown east side. Many of the women connected to his story were Indigenous women living under circumstances of severe vulnerability. Poverty, addiction, prostitution, social isolation. These conditions did not make them less valuable, but they could make them easier for someone else to exploit. A woman struggling with addiction may already be accustomed to people treating her drinking as unremarkable. A woman surviving through prostitution may already be accustomed to strangers offering money. A woman living on the margins may disappear without the world immediately demanding answers. And that is what makes the case so uncomfortable. Jordan did not appear to need to force his way into someone's life. He could offer something. A drink. Money. Company. Then another drink. And another. The police began seeing the same basic behavior repeatedly. Between the middle of October and the end of November 1987, officers intervened in 4 cases involving women Jordan was with: Rosemary Wilson, Verna Chartrand, Sheila Jo, Mabel Olson. These names are important because they represent something that the earlier deaths could not provide. They were living witnesses. People police could encounter before the story ended in a morgue. In 2 of those cases, the women's blood alcohol levels were recorded at approximately 0.52 and 0.43. And investigators heard Jordan encouraging women to drink. He offered money as an incentive. $20, $50, $75. The amounts might sound small today, but the meaning was not in the amount. The meaning was in the exchange. Drink more. Keep drinking. Finish it. And I will pay you. To investigators, that behavior offered a possible explanation for something that had been difficult to understand in the earlier deaths. Perhaps Jordan was not simply present when women drank themselves into unconsciousness. Perhaps he was actively encouraging the process. That distinction was crucial. There is a world of difference between 2 people sitting together with drinks and one person deliberately pushing another to continue drinking after that person's ability to make decisions has deteriorated. And according to the evidence described in the case material, Jordan repeatedly crossed that line. The police were watching. They were listening. They were documenting. And every new observation gave greater meaning to the deaths that had come before. Still, there was a problem. The law does not convict someone because a pattern feels disturbing. It does not convict someone because investigators believe two cases look similar. It does not convict someone because a man has behaved badly around vulnerable people. It requires evidence. And evidence is often strongest when it captures a person doing something rather than merely being present after something has happened. That opportunity came near the end of November. The police were watching Jordan again. He was with a woman who had become incapable of resisting. She was unconscious. The scene had crossed a threshold. She could no longer protect herself. She could no longer meaningfully participate in what was happening. And according to the case material, investigators saw Jordan forcing alcohol into her mouth. Think about the difference. A dead body can tell investigators that something went terribly wrong. A blood test can tell them that an enormous amount of alcohol entered the body. A hotel room can establish where the death occurred. But an officer watching an incapacitated woman while another person forces more alcohol into her mouth is something different. That is behavior. That is an action. That is a moment. And for the investigators watching, it was a moment that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Jordan was arrested. But the arrest was not the end of the mystery. It was the beginning of another one. Because now the police had to prove what they believed they had discovered. Was Vanessa Lee Buckner another tragic victim of alcohol? Or had Gilbert Paul Jordan played a criminal role in her death? And if he had, what about the other women? Could their deaths be connected to the same behavior? Could a court look at years of deaths and see what investigators believed they had seen? Or would each death remain trapped inside its own uncertainty? These questions would follow Jordan into the courtroom. But before that happened, there was something else that needed to be understood. The women. The people behind the statistics. The names that risked disappearing beneath words like alcohol-related death. Because there is a danger in telling this story only through the eyes of Gilbert Paul Jordan. His name is famous. His nickname survived. His conviction became part of Canadian criminal history. But the women did not become famous. Their lives were not turned into legends. Their faces did not become symbols in the same way. And that imbalance is important. The central figure in a true crime story is often the offender because the offender creates the mystery. But the mystery should never erase the victim. Vanessa Lee Buckner was 27. Before the Niagara Hotel, she was a person with a life that existed beyond the case file. And whatever happened during her final night, that life ended there. Her death became the case that finally brought Jordan to trial. But she was not the first woman whose death had been associated with him. And she would not be the last name to raise questions about his behavior. By the time investigators were watching Jordan in 1987, more than 2 decades had passed since Ivy Rose's death. 22 years. More than 2 decades in which the world had changed around him. Yet the central element remained. Alcohol. Again and again. And that is perhaps the most unsettling part of the entire story. There was no secret laboratory. No exotic poison. No elaborate weapon. No complicated mechanism. There was simply a substance that people had been using for centuries. A substance that could be bought openly. A substance that could be carried into a hotel room. A substance that could be handed to a stranger. And in the hands of someone who understood how vulnerable an intoxicated person could become, it could be turned into something far more dangerous. Jordan's alleged method did not begin with violence. It began with persuasion. That is what makes the story so difficult to watch. Because persuasion can look harmless from the outside. A man offers a woman a drink. He offers her money. He encourages her to finish it. He laughs. He waits. Then he offers another. Nothing about the first moment necessarily looks like murder. There is no obvious point where a bystander can say, that is when the crime began. The line moves gradually, drink by drink, minute by minute, until suddenly the woman cannot stand. Then she cannot speak clearly. Then she cannot resist. Then she cannot protect herself. And if no one intervenes, the room can become completely silent. That was the silence investigators were trying to understand. A silence that appeared in hotel rooms. A silence that appeared around women whose lives had already been pushed toward the margins. A silence that could be explained away by alcohol. Until someone finally began asking whether alcohol was really the whole explanation. The investigation into Gilbert Paul Jordan would eventually lead to a conviction. But it would not produce a complete answer to every death connected to his name. That distinction would remain with the case forever. One conviction, many suspicions, several surviving women, a collection of deaths, and a man whose behavior, when finally observed directly, gave investigators a glimpse into what might have been happening behind closed doors for years. That is why the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan is not simply about a man who drank with women. It is about the moment when drinking stopped being a social act and became a mechanism of control. It is about what happens when one person remains conscious enough to understand what is happening while another person becomes too intoxicated to understand anything at all. It is about the vulnerability of people whom society often fails to protect. And it is about how easily a death can disappear when everyone is already prepared to believe the simplest explanation. She drank too much. She had a problem. It was an accident. There was nothing anyone could do. For decades, those explanations existed around the edges of Jordan's story. Then Vanessa died. And suddenly, those explanations were no longer enough. Police began watching. They began recording. They began connecting. And eventually, they saw something that could not be explained away so easily. A woman who could no longer resist. A man beside her. Alcohol being forced into her mouth. And officers watching from nearby. That was the moment the past and the present collided. The old deaths. The hotel rooms. The names. The numbers. The suspicions. All of them seemed to point toward the same question. Had Gilbert Paul Jordan discovered a way to make deadly behavior look like ordinary drinking? And if so, how many times had he done it? The answer would never be completely established in court. But the investigation would reveal enough to transform the name Gilbert Paul Jordan into one of the darkest names associated with Vancouver's history of alcohol-related deaths. The Boozing Barber. A nickname that sounds almost harmless until you remember the women behind it. Until you remember Vanessa. Until you remember Ivy Rose. Until you remember the other names. And until you understand that behind every number was a human body, a human life, and a final moment that no one could go back and change. The courtroom would eventually decide what could be proven. History would remember what had been suspected. But the women themselves deserved something different. They deserved to be remembered as people. And that is where the story must go next. Away from the man. Away from the nickname. Away from the headlines. And toward the women who were there before the bottles were opened. Before the hotel doors closed. Before the police arrived. Before their names became part of someone else's story. Because if we want to understand what happened to Vanessa Lee Buckner, we first have to understand the world she was living in. A world where vulnerability could be mistaken for weakness. A world where addiction could make a person's suffering invisible. A world where a woman could disappear into a hotel room, and the first explanation offered might be that she had simply drunk too much. And in that world, Gilbert Paul Jordan knew exactly what he was offering. A drink. A little money. A little company. Then another drink. And another. Until the person sitting across from him was no longer able to walk away. The next part of the story begins there. With the women. With Vancouver. And with the world that allowed these encounters to happen again and again. Vancouver, British Columbia. From a distance, it can look like the kind of city where terrible things should be easy to notice. A city pressed between mountains and ocean. A city of rain-darkened streets, glass buildings, crowded sidewalks, hotels, bars, storefronts, and neighborhoods where thousands of people move through one another's lives without ever learning each other's names. But cities have shadows. And some shadows are not created by darkness. They are created by people becoming invisible. By the late 20th century, one of the places where that invisibility could become painfully real was Vancouver's downtown east side. This was the environment in which much of Gilbert Paul Jordan's story unfolded. It was not simply a geographical location. It was a world of contrasts. A few streets could separate comfort from desperation. A person could walk through one part of Vancouver surrounded by businesses, cars, restaurants, and ordinary routines, then enter another area where poverty, addiction, prostitution, and homelessness were part of everyday life. For people passing through, it might have been only another neighborhood. For those living there, it was home. And for some of the women who would eventually become connected to the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan, it was a place where survival could demand choices that people living outside that world might never understand. The women associated with Jordan were often Indigenous women. Many were living in poverty. Some struggled with alcoholism. Some were involved in prostitution. These circumstances are not simply background information. They are essential to understanding the environment in which Jordan operated. Because vulnerability is not always visible. Sometimes it looks like someone counting a few dollars in their hand. Sometimes it looks like someone accepting a drink because they have not eaten. Sometimes it looks like someone who has learned not to expect help. And sometimes it looks like a woman walking into a hotel room with a stranger because the transaction seems simple. A little money. A little alcohol. A little company. Nothing that, from the outside, necessarily looks extraordinary. That was the environment in which Jordan moved. And the more closely investigators examined his behavior, the more important that environment became. Gilbert Paul Jordan was born in Vancouver on December 12, 1931. His original name was Gilbert Paul Elsey. Later, he became known as Gilbert Paul Jordan. He worked as a barber. There was nothing about the occupation itself that would immediately distinguish him from thousands of other men. A barber. Someone who worked with his hands. Someone who interacted with people. Someone whose appearance in the ordinary world did not necessarily suggest what would later become associated with his name. But Jordan also had a history of alcoholism and a long criminal record. Those details would become increasingly significant as his life unfolded. Alcohol was already part of his world long before the investigation that eventually made him infamous. And that is important because the story of Jordan cannot be separated from the culture of drinking around him. Alcohol was not illegal. It was not hidden. It was not mysterious. It was part of ordinary social life. People drank to celebrate. People drank to forget. People drank because they were lonely. People drank because everyone around them was drinking. And people drank because addiction had transformed something ordinary into something they could no longer easily control. For someone like Jordan, alcohol existed in all of those worlds at once. It could be social. It could be transactional. It could be addictive. And according to the evidence that later emerged, it could become a means of controlling another person. That distinction would matter enormously. Because if Jordan had approached a woman carrying a weapon, the danger would have been obvious. If he had threatened her with violence, the situation would have looked like a crime from the beginning. But he did not need to announce danger. He could approach with something the woman might already want. Alcohol. That is what makes the setting so important. The danger did not necessarily begin with fear. It could begin with trust, or need, or desperation, or habit. A woman might accept a drink without believing she was placing herself in danger. She might accept money without understanding what would be expected in return. She might enter a hotel room without imagining that her ability to leave could disappear one drink at a time. And once alcohol began affecting her judgment, the balance between two people could change rapidly. One person could remain relatively aware. The other could become increasingly impaired. The person who still understood what was happening could make decisions. The person who was losing consciousness could not. That imbalance is at the center of the case. But before it became evidence, it was simply part of life in a city where many people were already struggling to survive. The downtown East Side had its own rhythm. People came and went. Hotels stood among businesses and bars. The streets could be busy, yet individuals could remain isolated. A person could be surrounded by hundreds of others and still have no one looking closely enough to notice that something was wrong. This is one of the cruelest paradoxes of urban life. Crowds create the illusion of safety. But crowds do not necessarily create protection. People pass each other. They look ahead. They continue toward work. They go home. They avoid getting involved. And when someone is already known to be struggling with addiction, behavior that would seem alarming in another person can become almost invisible. A woman stumbling through the street might attract little attention. A woman entering a hotel with a man might attract none. A woman who disappears after a night of drinking might initially be assumed to have simply gone somewhere else. This is not to say that no one cared. People did care. Families cared. Friends cared. Police officers cared. Communities cared. But social vulnerability can make the search for answers more difficult. The women connected to Jordan were not living in a world where every disappearance automatically triggered an immediate investigation. Their circumstances could make their suffering easier to overlook. And that is one of the reasons the story eventually became larger than a single criminal case. It became a story about who gets noticed, who gets believed, who gets protected, and whose death is allowed to become another statistic. By the time Vanessa Lee Buckner died in October 1987, Jordan's history already stretched back more than 2 decades. The earliest death connected to him in the case material was Ivy Rose in 1965. 22 years separated Ivy Rose from Vanessa. 22 years in which Jordan continued living, working, drinking, moving through Vancouver, meeting people, and appearing in circumstances that would later attract police attention. That span of time is difficult to comprehend. 22 years is long enough for an entire generation to grow up. Long enough for neighborhoods to change. Long enough for buildings to be demolished and replaced. Long enough for people to marry, have children, grow old, and die. And yet, in Jordan's story, the same basic element kept returning. Alcohol. In 1965, Ivy Rose. Then, decades later, a series of other women. Mary Johnson. Barbara Paul. Mary Johns. Patricia Thomas. Patricia Andrew. Vera Eri. The cases did not all look identical. Their blood alcohol levels were different. Their locations were different. The circumstances were not identical. But investigators eventually considered the similarities important enough that these deaths could be introduced as similar fact evidence in the proceedings concerning Vanessa Lee Buckner. That meant the past was no longer entirely separate from the present. The older cases could help the court understand the allegations surrounding the newer one. But the setting in which those deaths occurred remained important. Many of the women were vulnerable. And vulnerability has a way of becoming part of the environment. A person who has little money may value a small payment more than someone who has financial security. A person struggling with addiction may respond differently to an offer of alcohol. A person involved in prostitution may encounter strangers under circumstances where trust is already complicated. None of these facts makes a victim responsible for what happens to her. That distinction must be made clearly. A woman's addiction does not make her responsible for someone else's decision to exploit it. Poverty does not make a person less deserving of protection. Prostitution does not remove the right to bodily safety. And drinking does not give another person permission to harm someone who becomes incapacitated. But in the world surrounding Jordan, these factors could make danger easier to hide. That was the vulnerability. Not that the women were weak, but that the environment gave someone like Jordan opportunities. Opportunities to approach. Opportunities to offer. Opportunities to persuade. And, according to the evidence later presented, opportunities to push the drinking further. There is another important element to this setting. Hotels. Hotels can be strange places in a crime story. They are public and private at the same time. A person can enter a hotel surrounded by other people and then disappear behind a door. A hallway may be only a few steps long, but once a door closes, what happens inside may be known only to the people in the room. The women associated with Jordan were found in hotels and other locations. Ivy Rose was found in a Vancouver hotel. Mary Johnson was associated with the Aylmer Hotel. Barbara Paul with the Glenard Hotel. Other deaths were associated with 2503 Kingsway and the Clifton Hotel. Vanessa Lee Buckner was found at the Niagara Hotel. The names of these buildings might seem like small details, but they form part of the physical geography of the case. The hotels were places where people could meet, places where alcohol could be consumed, places where strangers could enter and leave, places where privacy could be created quickly. A hotel room does not need to be sinister to become the setting of a tragedy. It only needs a closed door. Inside, the outside world becomes distant. The sounds of the city are muffled. The people in neighboring rooms do not necessarily know what is happening. And by the time someone realizes there is a problem, the critical moment may already have passed. This is particularly important in cases involving alcohol. A person who becomes unconscious does not necessarily look like someone being attacked. There may be no scream, no struggle, no obvious injury. Someone may simply appear to be sleeping, and that appearance can be dangerously misleading. The body can be in severe distress while the room itself looks almost ordinary. A bottle can sit on a table. A glass can remain nearby. Clothing can be undisturbed. The bed can look normal. And yet someone can be dying. That is the quiet horror of alcohol poisoning. It can unfold without the visual drama associated with conventional violence. And in a setting where heavy drinking is already common, the danger can become even harder to recognize. That environment created a terrible possibility. A death could be interpreted as something the victim had done to herself. The presence of alcohol could seem to close the investigation before it had truly begun. This is one reason the later surveillance of Jordan became so important. Police were able to observe what happened before the death. They were able to see the interaction. They were able to observe Jordan's behavior toward women who were still alive. That changed the meaning of the earlier cases, because investigators were no longer looking only at the final result. They were watching the process, and the process was what frightened them. Jordan would approach women. He would offer alcohol. He would offer money. He would encourage them to drink. According to the case material, the amounts of money could be $20, $50, or $75. Those offers created a transaction. But what exactly was being purchased? Companionship? Sex? Drinking? Something else? The answer is not always clear from the available material. But the behavior surrounding the alcohol became increasingly difficult to ignore. Investigators heard Jordan urging women to drink. And the more intoxicated they became, the more vulnerable they became. That was the central dynamic. It did not require a complicated psychological theory. It was visible. Alcohol impairs judgment. Alcohol impairs coordination. Heavy intoxication can lead to unconsciousness. An unconscious person cannot meaningfully resist. And an unconscious person cannot protect themselves from someone who continues to give them alcohol. This is where Jordan's story moves beyond ordinary drinking. It moves into the question of intent. What did he know? What did he understand? Did he recognize how intoxicated these women had become? Did he understand that continued drinking could kill them? Did he continue because he wanted them unconscious? Or was his behavior driven by something else? These questions would become part of the legal and psychological tension surrounding the case. But the setting itself provides one important answer. Jordan had access. He was able to meet these women. He was able to bring alcohol into their interactions. He was able to offer money. And he was able to move them into private spaces. That access mattered. Because dangerous behavior cannot become a repeated pattern unless the person has repeated opportunities. And Jordan had them. For years. The first known case in 1965 did not result in charges. Then the years continued. By the time Vanessa Buckner died in 1987, the circumstances surrounding Jordan had become impossible for police to ignore. Her death did not occur in a vacuum. There was history behind it. There were earlier women. There were earlier blood alcohol readings. There were earlier associations. And there was a man who had been present again. The city had changed since Ivy Rose's death. Jordan had aged. He was no longer the young man he had been in 1965. But the presence of alcohol in his interactions with vulnerable women remained. And that continuity is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. It suggests that the most important element was not age, not location, not a particular hotel. It was behavior. The behavior of approaching vulnerable women. The behavior of offering alcohol. The behavior of encouraging them to consume more. And eventually, according to the observations made by police, the behavior of continuing even after a woman had become incapable of resisting. By the time detectives began surveillance in 1987, they were not simply investigating a single death. They were watching a man whose name had become connected to a series of women who had died under circumstances involving alcohol. But they still had to be careful, because suspicion can destroy a person if it is allowed to replace evidence. And the women deserved better than a story built on assumptions. They deserved the truth. If Jordan had caused their deaths, that needed to be proven. If a death could not be proven against him, that uncertainty needed to remain. This is particularly important when dealing with marginalized victims. There is a temptation to tell their stories as if their vulnerability itself proves that someone must have exploited them. But vulnerability is not evidence. It is context. Evidence must still be examined. That is what investigators began doing. They examined the deaths. They examined Jordan. They examined the women who survived encounters with him. They watched. They listened. They documented. And slowly, The city that had provided the background for the story became part of the evidence. The streets of Vancouver, the downtown east side, the hotels, the bars, the alcohol, the money, the women, the man. All of them connected through a series of encounters that might once have looked unrelated. And then there was Vanessa. Her death would become the center of the case. But to understand why her death mattered so much, we have to understand what came before. We have to understand the long shadow cast by the earlier women. Because Vanessa was not the first. She was the moment when investigators finally had enough reason to look more closely. And when they looked, they found something that had been hidden in plain sight. Jordan was still doing it. Still approaching women. Still offering alcohol. Still offering money. Still encouraging them to drink. And eventually, police saw a woman who was no longer able to protect herself. That moment would become the bridge between suspicion and prosecution. But before the arrest, before the courtroom, before the verdict, there was the city itself. Vancouver. A beautiful city with a dark corner. A city where mountains could rise behind the skyline while, only streets away, people struggled with addiction and poverty. A city where a hotel room could be a temporary shelter, a place of work, a place to drink, or the final room a person ever entered. A city where people could disappear without immediately being noticed. And a city where Gilbert Paul Jordan learned how to move through that environment. He did not need to hide in the wilderness. He did not need an isolated cabin. He did not need a secret laboratory. He could operate in ordinary places. Places where people were already drinking. Places where women were already vulnerable. Places where strangers coming and going was normal. That was the setting. And it was perfectly suited to a crime that depended on appearing ordinary. A glass on a table. A bottle opened. Money changing hands. A woman drinking. Another drink. Then another. The outside world continuing as normal. Until the woman could no longer speak. Until she could no longer stand. Until she could no longer resist. And finally, until she could no longer breathe. The horror was not that the setting looked frightening. The horror was that it did not. Nothing about a bottle of alcohol automatically announces danger. Nothing about a hotel room automatically suggests murder. Nothing about a woman accepting money automatically means she is walking into a trap. That is why the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan requires us to slow down. To look at the environment. To look at the people who live there. To understand how ordinary objects and ordinary circumstances could become dangerous when placed in the hands of the wrong person. And most importantly, to remember that the women were not simply products of that environment. They were people living within it. They had hopes. They had relationships. They had fears. They had histories. They had moments of happiness. They had moments of pain. And eventually, for some of them, their lives became names in an investigation surrounding one man. The case material tells us what happened to some of those names. It tells us where they were found. It gives us blood alcohol levels. It gives us dates. It gives us Jordan's connection to them. But it does not give us every detail of who they were. That absence should not be filled with invention. Instead, it should remind us of something fundamental. The women deserve to be remembered even when the surviving records are incomplete. Their humanity existed before the case file, before the alcohol level, before the hotel room, before the police report, and before anyone ever called Gilbert Paul Jordan the boozing barber. The setting matters because it tells us how easy it was for the victims to disappear into the background. But the next step is to bring them forward again, to move away from the streets, away from the hotels, away from the bottles, and toward the women themselves. Because Vanessa Lee Buckner was not born on the night she died. She had 27 years before that hotel room. 27 years of experiences that existed beyond Gilbert Paul Jordan. And if this story is going to be told with any sense of justice, then her life must come before her death. The same is true for the other women whose names appear in the investigation. They were not merely victims. They were people. And that is where the story must now slow down. Before we ask how Vanessa died, we need to ask who Vanessa was. Before we study the evidence, we need to remember the human being behind it. Before the hotel room becomes the center of the story, we need to step outside it. Back into the life that came before. Because a woman should never be remembered only by the way she died. Anne Vanessa Lee Buckner deserves to be remembered as more than the final drink that ended her life. Where nobody looked twice. There are places in every city where people know one another. They know who lives upstairs. They know who owns the corner store. They know which restaurant stays open late. They know which apartment has a broken light over the entrance, and which house always has someone standing on the porch. And then there are places where people can pass within inches of one another and remain complete strangers. Vancouver's downtown east side could be both. It could be crowded and lonely at the same time. People moved through its streets constantly, yet many of those people were living lives that existed almost entirely outside the attention of the wider city. For some, the neighborhood was simply where they lived. For others, it was where they worked. For others, it was where they went when they had nowhere else to go. There were hotels, bars, storefronts, rooming houses, restaurants, sidewalks, alleys, and busy streets. There were people looking for work. People looking for money. People looking for alcohol. People looking for drugs. People looking for companionship. People looking for somewhere to sleep. And among them were women whose circumstances made them especially vulnerable to men who understood how to exploit desperation. That was the world into which Gilbert Paul Jordan repeatedly stepped. Not a hidden world. Not a secret world. A visible world. A world that existed in plain sight. And perhaps that was precisely why it could be so difficult to recognize danger inside it. A man walking beside a woman did not automatically attract attention. A woman entering a hotel with a man did not automatically attract attention. A bottle of alcohol in someone's hand certainly did not. Even a woman who was heavily intoxicated might not attract the kind of attention that her condition should have demanded. In a city where heavy drinking was part of everyday life for some people, intoxication could become background noise. People saw it. People expected it. People walked around it. And sometimes people stopped asking questions. That environment would become critical to understanding the investigation into Jordan. Because according to the case material, the women he approached were often indigenous women living in poverty, dealing with alcoholism, or involved in prostitution. These circumstances placed them at the intersection of several forms of vulnerability. Financial vulnerability, social vulnerability, addiction, isolation, and the stigma that accompanied all of them. To understand the danger, it is important to understand what vulnerability actually means. It does not mean that a person is incapable. It does not mean that a person lacks intelligence. It does not mean that a person has somehow invited exploitation. It means that someone else may have identified a weakness in the circumstances surrounding that person's life. For Jordan, money could be useful. Alcohol could be useful. Privacy could be useful. And a woman who desperately needed one of those things could become easier to approach. Imagine the simplest possible encounter. A man approaches a woman on the street. He talks to her. He offers her money. He offers her a drink. There is nothing immediately dramatic about it. No threat. No weapon. No shouting. No obvious violence. The woman accepts. They leave together. From a distance, it might look like an ordinary transaction. That was part of the danger. The beginning could look harmless. The danger could emerge later. Inside the room. After the first drink. After the second. After the woman's judgment became clouded. After her balance deteriorated. After her ability to make decisions weakened. After she became unconscious. By then, the person who had been sitting across from Jordan might no longer have been capable of protecting herself. And if Jordan's intention was to push the drinking further, the private room gave him something the street could not. Time. Privacy. Control. This is why hotels appear repeatedly in the story. A hotel is a strange kind of place. Thousands of people may pass through its doors, but no one knows the details of what happens behind each one. A guest checks in. A door closes. The hallway becomes quiet. Someone inside may be asleep. Someone may be drinking. Someone may be arguing. Someone may be dying. From the outside, the door looks exactly the same. The room does not announce what is happening. That is one of the reasons the death of Ivy Rose in 1965 was so significant in retrospect. She had reportedly been drinking with Jordan. Her naked body was later found in a Vancouver hotel. The blood alcohol level associated with her death was approximately 0.51. Yet Jordan was not criminally charged in connection with her death. There was no conviction. No courtroom conclusion that he had caused it. That fact must remain clear. But from the perspective of what happened years later, Ivy Rose became part of a history investigators would eventually examine. Her death was no longer simply a date in the distant past. It became one of the earliest known points in a pattern surrounding Jordan. 22 years later, Vanessa Lee Buckner would die. And the setting would once again involve alcohol. Once again, a hotel. Once again, Jordan. The repetition is unsettling. But it is also precisely why the investigation had to be careful. Similarity does not automatically prove causation. A person can know someone who later dies. A person can drink with someone who later dies. A person can be present at a hotel where someone later dies. None of those facts, standing alone, proves murder. The police needed more. They needed evidence that could establish what Jordan actually did. That evidence would eventually come from the living. But before the surveillance began, the city had already provided Jordan with something important. Access. He knew how to move through the environment. He knew where vulnerable women could be found. He knew that alcohol could be used as an incentive. And according to the evidence later presented, he knew how to turn drinking into a transaction. $20, $50, $75. Those amounts appear almost insignificant when viewed from a distance. But a person's financial circumstances determine what money means. For someone with a secure income, $75 may be a minor expense. For someone living in poverty, it can mean food, a room, transportation, drugs, alcohol, a temporary escape from another problem. The value of money is never simply the number printed on it. It is the need behind the hand receiving it. And that was the environment in which Jordan operated. He could offer something that another person needed. Then he could offer alcohol. Then more alcohol. And according to investigators, he could continue encouraging the drinking even as the woman became more impaired. This was not simply a question of alcohol consumption. It was a question of power. At the beginning of an encounter, two people may appear to have equal control. Both are standing. Both can speak. Both can make decisions. Both can leave. But alcohol changes that balance. One person becomes slower. The other remains capable of making choices. The woman may stumble. Jordan can remain standing. She may lose the ability to communicate clearly. He can still understand what is happening. She may fall asleep. He remains awake. She may become unconscious. He can decide whether the drinking stops. That transformation can happen gradually enough that an observer who sees only isolated moments might miss what is happening. But someone who deliberately creates the transformation knows something different. The question is whether Jordan did. The evidence gathered in 1987 would become crucial because investigators were able to observe his behavior directly. They did not have to rely entirely on old reports. They could watch him in the environment where he had been meeting women. They could see what happened. And what they saw gave them a reason to believe that the alcohol was not simply incidental. It was central. By this point, Jordan was no longer a young man. He had been born in Vancouver in 1931. He had worked as a barber. He had a history of alcoholism. He had a long criminal record. His life had already contained years of trouble before Vanessa Buckner died. Yet there was something almost deceptively ordinary about the occupation he had chosen. A barber. A man who cut hair. A profession based on personal contact. A person who might spend his day talking to strangers. Listening to their stories. Watching their faces in the mirror. The image of a barber does not naturally fit the image that would later surround Jordan. And that contrast is part of what makes his story so disturbing. People rarely imagine danger wearing a sign. They imagine danger as something visibly different. Someone aggressive. Someone threatening. Someone obviously unstable. But many dangerous people can appear ordinary. They can have jobs. They can talk casually. They can joke. They can sit in bars. They can know people for years. The ability to appear ordinary can be one of the most effective forms of camouflage. Jordan did not need to announce what investigators would eventually suspect about him. He only needed to behave like another man looking for company. Another man drinking. Another man talking. Another man offering money. And if nobody looked closely, the pattern could remain hidden. That is why the timeline matters. 1965. Ivy Rose. 1980. Mary Johnson. 1981. Barbara Paul. 1982. Mary Johns. 1984. Patricia Thomas. 1985. Patricia Andrew. 1986. Vera Eri. 1987. Vanessa Lee Buckner. These names stretch across more than 20 years. They belong to different moments in Vancouver's history, but they became linked through Jordan and through the role alcohol played in the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Some of these women had extraordinarily high recorded blood alcohol levels. Mary Johns, approximately 0.76. Patricia Andrew, approximately 0.79. Vanessa Buckner, approximately 0.91. Those numbers are difficult to imagine. But there is an even more important question than how high the number was. How did it get there? A person cannot answer that question after death. The body can be examined. The blood can be tested. The room can be searched. Witnesses can be interviewed. But the final sequence may remain invisible. Who poured the drink? Who offered it? Who encouraged another? Who watched? Who stopped? Who did not stop? Those are human actions. And human actions leave different kinds of evidence. Sometimes they leave fingerprints. Sometimes they leave witnesses. Sometimes they leave memories. Sometimes they leave nothing except a question. That is why the earlier deaths were so difficult. The evidence did not necessarily provide a direct path from Jordan to criminal responsibility. He was associated with the women. He had been drinking with some of them. But association is not proof. The investigation needed something more concrete. And Vanessa's death finally created the circumstances in which that evidence could begin to emerge. On October 12, 1987, police found Vanessa Lee Buckner dead at the Niagara Hotel. She had been drinking with Jordan the night before. Her blood alcohol level was approximately 0.91. Jordan's fingerprints were found at the scene associated with her death. And then another woman, Edna Shade, was found dead. For investigators, the repetition had become too difficult to ignore. But instead of waiting for another death, they changed their strategy. They began surveillance. The decision was important, because surveillance allows investigators to witness behavior before it becomes a mystery. They could watch Jordan approach women. They could watch what he offered. They could observe how the interactions developed. And perhaps most importantly, they could see what happened when the women became intoxicated. This was the moment when the setting became evidence. The street was evidence. The hotel was evidence. The interaction was evidence. The alcohol was evidence. The behavior was evidence. And the women who survived could become witnesses. Between mid-October and late November 1987, police intervened in 4 cases involving women Jordan was with. Rosemary Wilson, Verna Chartrand, Sheila Joe, Mabel Olson. These women survived. That fact alone separates their stories from the women whose deaths investigators were trying to understand. Police could observe them. They could test their blood alcohol levels. They could hear what Jordan said. They could watch what he did. In 2 cases, the recorded blood alcohol levels were approximately 0.52 and 0.43. And investigators heard Jordan encouraging women to drink while offering them money. The behavior had become visible. The pattern was no longer something that existed only in old files. It was happening in front of police. But even then, the most disturbing moment had not yet arrived. It came when investigators watched Jordan with a woman who had become unconscious. At that point, there was no meaningful choice left. The woman could not simply decide to walk away. She could not protect herself. And according to the case material, investigators witnessed Jordan forcing alcohol into her mouth. That moment was the turning point, because it demonstrated something the earlier deaths could not. It demonstrated what Jordan did when a woman had already lost the ability to resist. The police intervened. Jordan was arrested, and the city around them continued moving. That detail is easy to overlook. While detectives were building their case, Vancouver did not stop. Buses continued along the streets. People continued walking. Bars continued serving drinks. Hotels continued receiving guests. Women continued surviving from one day to the next. The world did not know that a case was beginning to take shape. And perhaps that is how major criminal investigations often begin. Not with the entire world suddenly becoming aware, but with a few people noticing something that everyone else has missed. A detective noticing a name, a laboratory technician noticing a number, a witness remembering a conversation, a pattern emerging from files that had once seemed unrelated. The investigation into Jordan had reached that point. The city had given him anonymity. Now the police were taking that anonymity away. But the setting also raised a deeper issue. Why were these women so vulnerable? And why were their deaths so difficult to distinguish from the consequences of addiction? The answer lies partly in stigma. When society sees a person primarily through the lens of addiction, it becomes easy to forget that addiction does not erase victimhood. A person struggling with alcoholism can still be assaulted. A person involved in prostitution can still be raped. A person living in poverty can still be murdered. A person who makes dangerous choices can still be deliberately harmed by another human being. These truths may sound obvious, but in practice, history has often treated marginalized victims differently. Their lives may receive less attention. Their disappearances may be questioned. Their deaths may be attributed quickly to the circumstances they were already living with. Alcohol, drugs, poverty, violence, bad luck. That is why the women connected to Jordan must not be reduced to their vulnerabilities. Those circumstances help explain the environment. They do not define the people. And they certainly do not excuse anyone who might exploit them. The story of Vanessa Lee Buckner becomes more powerful when we understand this distinction. She did not become important because she died in a hotel. She was already important because she was a person. The hotel simply became the place where her life ended. And that is a difficult truth about crime scenes. A crime scene is rarely the beginning of a victim's story. It is almost always the end of something much larger. The room contains the final chapter. The victim's life contains everything that came before. But investigators often have to begin with the final chapter. They start with the body. They work backward. They reconstruct the hours, the drinks, the people, the movements, the conversations. And somewhere inside those fragments, they try to find the truth. That was exactly what happened with Vanessa. Her body was the final evidence. Her life was the missing context. And Jordan was the person investigators needed to understand. Who was he? How did he approach women? What did he offer? What did he expect? What happened after they entered a room? And most importantly, what did he do when they became too intoxicated to protect themselves? The surveillance provided some of those answers. But the courtroom would eventually demand more. It would demand that investigators separate the suspicious from the provable, the tragic from the criminal, the pattern from the coincidence, and the suspicion surrounding multiple deaths from the single death for which Jordan would ultimately be convicted. This is one of the reasons the case remains complicated. It is tempting to look at the list of women and draw a straight line. Ivy Rose, Mary Johnson, Barbara Paul, Mary Johns, Patricia Thomas, Patricia Andrew, Vera Eri, Vanessa Buckner. One man, many women, many deaths. But history is not a straight line. It is made of fragments. Some connect, some do not. Some connections are strong, some are weak. Some remain unresolved forever. The legal system has to work with that uncertainty. And so must anyone telling the story. That does not make the story less disturbing. In some ways, it makes it more disturbing. Because if every death had been solved, the story would have a beginning, middle, and end. There would be a final answer. Instead, there are questions. And questions can survive for generations. They can remain in families. They can remain in police files. They can remain in the memories of people who knew the victims. And they can remain in the history of a city. The name Gilbert Paul Jordan became part of that history. But so did the names of the women. Even if they are remembered less often. Even if their photographs are harder to find. Even if their stories were never fully reconstructed. Their existence mattered. Their deaths mattered. And their circumstances mattered. The setting is therefore not simply Vancouver. It is vulnerability. It is anonymity. It is addiction. It is poverty. It is the privacy of hotel rooms. It is the ordinary presence of alcohol. It is a social environment where one person's suffering could be mistaken for another ordinary consequence of life on the margins. And within that environment, a man could move almost unnoticed, until one death became impossible to ignore. Then another. Then surveillance. Then living witnesses. Then an officer watching a woman lying unconscious while alcohol was being forced into her mouth. That was the moment the city began to see what had been hiding inside the ordinary. The drink was no longer just a drink. The hotel was no longer just a hotel. The man was no longer just a man sitting beside a woman. The pattern had become visible. But there was still one thing investigators could not recover through surveillance. They could not recover the lives of the women who had already died. They could not ask Ivy Rose what she remembered. They could not ask Mary Johnson what happened during her final hours. They could not ask Barbara Paul, Mary Johns, Patricia Thomas, Patricia Andrew, Vera Eri. The dead remained silent. And Vanessa, too, could no longer speak for herself. So the investigation had to speak through evidence, through blood alcohol levels, through fingerprints, through witnesses, through police observations, through the surviving women, and eventually through the courtroom. But before the courtroom came the human stories. Because the more investigators focused on Jordan, the more important it became to understand the women he encountered. Who were they? What brought them into those rooms? What did they believe was happening? Did they trust him? Did they fear him? Did they see him as simply another man offering alcohol and money? We cannot invent answers to questions the surviving records do not provide. But we can recognize why those questions matter. Every victim enters a crime story with a life that began long before the crime. And when that life is reduced to a blood alcohol number, something is lost. The person disappears. Only the death remains. That cannot be allowed to happen here. Because Vanessa Lee Buckner was 27 years old when she died. Not 27 years old in a statistic. 27 years old in a life. And somewhere before October 12, 1987, she had been a child. A teenager. A young woman. A person who had known people, places, disappointments, hopes, and ordinary days. All of that existed before the Niagara Hotel. And none of it can be reduced to 0.91. The number tells us something about her final condition. It does not tell us who she was. That is why the next stage of the story must turn toward the victims. Because the setting explains how the danger could remain hidden. The victims explain what was lost. And among them, Vanessa Lee Buckner stands at the center of the case that finally brought Gilbert Paul Jordan before a judge. Her death forced investigators to look backward. Her death brought old names back into the conversation. Her death gave surveillance a purpose. Her death created the evidence that would ultimately lead to a conviction. But Vanessa did not exist for the purpose of becoming evidence. She was living her life. Until one night, she met Gilbert Paul Jordan. They drank together. The door of a hotel room closed. And somewhere after the first drink, before the last, the balance between the two people changed. The woman became vulnerable. The man remained capable of making decisions. And eventually, Vanessa could no longer make any decisions at all. That is the moment the investigation would spend years trying to reconstruct. But the investigation begins long before that moment. It begins with a city, a neighborhood, a social world. A man who knew how to move through it, and women whose circumstances made them easier to overlook. The setting did not create Gilbert Paul Jordan. It did not cause the deaths. And it certainly did not make the victims responsible. But it provided the environment in which his behavior could continue. For years. Almost unnoticed. Until the city finally looked twice. And when it did, it saw something chilling. The same man. The same alcohol. The same vulnerable population, the same promise of money, and in the most disturbing moments witnessed by police, the same determination to keep the alcohol flowing even after the woman could no longer protect herself. The investigation had begun to move, but the women had not yet been given their place in the story. That comes next, because before Vanessa Lee Buckner became a case, she was Vanessa. Before the other women became names in a police investigation, they were themselves. And before we examine the night Vanessa died, we need to understand the life that existed before that night. The life that alcohol did not define. The life that Gilbert Paul Jordan did not create. The life that ended in a hotel room. and the woman whose name should be spoken before the nickname of the man who survived her.